I'm on a mission like a couple spies, and that, guys, is the reason why I catechize the good.
Welcome to the Reformed Standard. I'm Tony. Let's get started. Question 18 of the Westminster Larger Catechism reads, what are God's works of providence? Answer, God's works of providence are his most holy, wise, and powerful preserving and governing all his creatures, ordering them and all their actions to his own glory. So this is kind of an introduction question. So we're going to see in question 19 and 20, it kind of focuses in on the angels and the humans as it did in the questions about creation. And so this actually shows us something important about the theology of the Westminster Confession and Catechisms here. In Reformed theology in general, this is the case, is that creation and providence are very much seen as flip sides of a coin. So creation is an instantaneous or an initial act, and then providence is sort of the ongoing work that act brings about. So God creates all things, he creates all things good, and then in the work of providence, he sustains, or in the language here, he preserves them, and he governs them. So it's not the case as the deists or some kinds of Arminian theology would argue, that God sort of sets up the situation. He sets up creation and then sort of allows it to spin on its own, or to kind of unfold under its own governance and authority, right? He doesn't wind up the clock or set the top of spinning and then just watch and see what happens. Instead, he exercises his holiness, his wisdom, and his power, and he does this to preserve and govern all his creatures. So one thing that we often think about when we talk about creatures is we think about just living creatures. We think about animals, we think about humans, angels, we might even think about certain kinds of plants, but what we don't usually recognize is that when we talk about creatures theologically, we're talking about all created things. And so in that instance, we'd be talking about dust molecules and atoms and black holes and stars on the other side of the universe. All of these things are preserved, right? He sustains them, and in him and they live and move and have their being. We talked about that in the Scots Confession, and he governs them. So it's not the case that he just sustains them in their being and then lets them do what they want, but he's intimately involved in keeping them in existence and preserving them from fading back into nothingness, and in governing them. And it's not just that he governs some of his creatures or some parts of all of his creatures, but he governs all of his creatures and all of their actions. And so he orders them in order to bring about the manifestation of his own glory. So this is really, in some ways, these sort of two vectors of theology, that God orders all things and that he orders all things to the manifestation of his glory. These two vectors really are the distinctive elements of Reformed theology. They're not the only distinctive elements, but they're kind of, when you think about Reformed theology, when you think about what it is that makes a person Reformed, we can obviously say that being a confessional Christian is part of what it means to be Reformed, holding a particular confession, right? There's Lutheran confessions, there's Roman Catholic confessions, but being a Reformed Christian is holding a confession that emphasizes these two vectors, that holds these two vectors as sort of one of the organizing principles. There are other elements of Reformed theology that are distinct, but these are really the key ones that make Reformed Christians Reformed. And if you look at our confessions and what's different about our confessions, if you look at our soteriology, if you look at tulip, if you look at the way that our Trinitarian theology is organized, all of these things in some ways center around this fact that God not only creates all things according to the counsel of his will, but he preserves all things according to the counsel of his will. And in that counsel of his will, he preserves and governs them all, ordering them and all of their actions to the manifestation of his own glory.
know, if you want, you could know this. The catechism, hey, the catechism, hey. Do you know what the chief and the man is? And how the Father, Son, and Spirit do manage? Do you know, if you want, you could know?
West Side.